Hey guys, and for this next video we're going to go over Eve, and this is the continuation of the scavenger hunt series on different biblical characters that fall down and got distracted down different sin paths away from who Jesus was and away from God, and they went down a certain sin path and they got distracted. And so the account of Eve, most of you know Adam and Eve, they're first people on earth, and they were also the first people to sin, and it brought sin into the world. Genesis 3 says, "The serpent was more clever than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. The serpent said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?' The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden. Do not touch it. If you do, you will die.' 'You will certainly not die,' the serpent said to the woman. 'God knows that when you eat fruit from that tree, you will know things have that you have never known before, like God, who will be able to tell the difference between good and evil.' The woman saw that the tree's fruit was good to eat and pleasing to look at. She also saw it would make a person wise, so she took some of the fruit and ate it." Okay, so God told them not to eat from this tree, but she was swayed by the serpent to eat from this tree. And so sin entered the world, and so some of the consequences that followed that was that um, the serpent, for one, had to start crawling around on slithering around on his belly. So the serpent did have legs, and now it's what we would look at as like snakes. Eve had to have childbirth, which would be very painful, and every woman after that would have to have childbirth, which is painful, and like things like work would be painful, and it wouldn't be joyful anymore because they still had to work even when the world was perfect, but they didn't mind the work. And the work, as God described, would be like hard on their body, like working the fields. And and so that was some of just the consequences for that sin. They got distracted by, it was pride, because they wanted to know the knowledge that God knew. And again, God said one thing and they did the other. That's what sin boils down to. What God says, one thing, and then you do the other. And then after that, she gave birth to two sons. And that's also a very interesting story in how God was involved even here. It's in Genesis 4. It said, "Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, 'With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man.' Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept the flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain his offering did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.' Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him." Okay, so then she gave birth to two sons, and one of them ended up killing the other one. So God's grace is huge in this because he still used Eve. She was actually one of the first people to introduce sin to the whole world. She did what God said one thing, and she did the opposite, and that was sin. And we had a bunch of consequences, and the biggest consequence is that the world was now in this state of sin. Now, God's grace here is huge because he still let her be the mother of the world. Like, the descendants of the whole world started with Adam and Eve. And that's huge. And he still knew that Cain was going to do that, and Cain had consequences of his own. And he still allowed Eve to be the mother of the world, even though he knew that some of her descendants were going to do things like Cain did. Like Cain murdered his brother. And God knew that, and yet he still had grace on Eve and allowed her to be the mother of the world, which is extremely cool how good God is on that. And he also showed grace to them in the fact that he could have just started over and he could have wiped them out, but he didn't. He allowed them to continue living and even continue living in relation with him, but they had this thing called sin now. So I hope this encourages you again, that it's just another example of God's grace and God's goodness. And even through sin, like there are consequences, but even through sin, that God still shows his goodness. So you guys are always welcome to come to church on Sunday, which is tomorrow at 10:30, and we have high school and junior high girls youth group at 6 o'clock.